Welcome back to Just One Question. And I am honored today to have Seth Ettenberg with me. He is the CEO and president of BlueRock Therapeutics, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Bayer. Now, Seth is a biotech entrepreneur, and he's on the cutting edge of something which I hope he's going to tell us more about, called regenerative, say that twice, medicine. And Seth, first of all, how the heck are you?
Hey, good to see you, Nick, and talk with you again. I'm actually battling a cold. You might be able to hear that in my voice as I'm speaking to you. It feels like every time I get on a plane now, I bring back a special gift. And this time it was a cold.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about that. I did notice it. I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want you to feel self-conscious. But now that we've brought it up,
All right.
we'll put your voice through filters and disguise
Excellent.
it, so that nobody will know. All right. So more seriously and to the point, you are an expert in, and your company is hot in the trail of something called regenerative medicine. That would not exist without technology. So put those two pieces together for us. What is this new form of medicine that you're pursuing, and how does technology make it happen?
Absolutely, Nick. So regenerative medicine refers to the idea and now the practice of rebuilding human tissue and human cells. Many times in disease and with aging, the cells and the tissues in our body begin to debilitate. Probably the most well-known and obvious of these are the neurodegenerative disorders, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And so what our company, as well as many other academic labs and clinical trials across the globe are doing, are replacing those very cells that are lost or damaged in disease in order to rebuild or regenerate our tissues and thereby replace the function that those cells actually do, a very complicated function in our body.
It's incredibly powerful promise.
Yeah.
And I can't resist one follow-up question, maybe two, but I'm really curious. So before we started recording, we were talking about Parkinson's. If everything went well, and of course, nothing always goes to plan, but if everything went well, how far away are we from making a real difference in the life of Parkinson's patients?
All right. So if you will, allow me to take one step back from your actual question, and then I promise I will answer it at the end
Okay.
of this, which is to tell you first, well, what is Parkinson's disease? How does it come about? And I'll tell you that story by telling you what a patient goes through in their journey. When a patient first comes into the doctor's office, they might describe a symptom that they're having as difficulty sleeping is the most common, or just a little slower getting across the room or getting to some object or obstacle they're trying to get around. At that very moment, from when the patient then becomes diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, they've already lost 60 to 80% of the dopaminergic neurons, the very specialized cells in our brain that are required to help us with movement. And those cells are lost and gone dead. And so we can use drugs, and we have phenomenal medicines in the physician's desk reference that allow our doctors to prescribe medicines to keep that patient feeling okay and operating mostly okay, but both the patient and the doctor know over the next either 2 to 3 years, sometimes even a decade, that journey is going to worsen and eventually end in death. And it's just a horrible downward spiral as those cells continue to die and our functions and our mental acuity goes away. And so what we're doing, and what many others around the world are starting to do, is to rebuild those cells and replace them in the brains of Parkinson's patients. And there were two Nobel Prize winning discoveries, one that was far off from here where I'm sitting in Boston, across the world in Japan, that allowed us to understand that you could take any adult cell, be it a hair cell, a skin cell, a blood cell, and then reprogram it back to a stem cell state. Now, stem cells are the very earliest cells in our embryos, and when we're an embryo, that allows for the building of every cell of the body. So once we have the ability to create those stem cells in the lab, we can now, based on decades, no centuries of learnings of human development, the instructions required to take a stem cell into a, like I told you earlier, dopaminergic neuron, all the steps that are required, we can now do that in the lab because of these discoveries. It's just mind-blowing. And now we can begin to replace tissues, replace cells that give the full functionality. Rather than just taking away a single symptom, we can envision and imagine, dare I say, curative moments where these cells replace that full function.
Unbelievable. And I'm so caught up in the promise of this, having watched my grandfather decline and die from Parkinson's. So it hits very close to home. And I'm so caught up in it and so excited about it that I'm forgetting to ask the other piece of it, which was, how does technology play into this? This would not be possible, I'm assuming, without technological assistance of various kinds. But what are a couple of the key ones that make this possible?
Sure. You're such a gracious host because I didn't answer your question. Your question was, and I want to just go back to it, how long until we can see something like this coming to patients? And so what I wanted to just tell you is, so I represent BlueRock Therapeutics. We just completed the first ever phase 1 clinical trial, which is the earliest testing of 12 different Parkinson's patients. And we're now reporting, and we've reported on that data. We'll now go through a series of later stage development that are more controlled to show the benefit or the efficacy of doing this new revolutionary medicine. And so I think in the next 5 to 10 years, ourselves and several others will have treatments for Parkinson's, for cardiac disease, even for blindness, which is something that we're involved in as well, coming forward, and patients can start to look forward to those moments about 5-10 years away from now.
That's amazing.
Coming back to your digital health question. So
yes,
digital health plays a critical role, I would say, in all biotech companies now, but certainly in ours. Our experience with digital health comes in sort of 2 flavors for us. One is in physical hardware of digital health. Parkinson's itself is a very heterogeneous disease. It shows up in people differently. Some people experience hallucinations at night. Other people experience a right hand tremor, while someone might have pain in their feet. And so because it's so heterogeneous, it's hard to describe the one thing or the few things that patient requires. And so we don't have a good way of catching what we call the clinical endpoints, the thing that we want the medicine to be able to do.
Right.
So what digital health allows us to do is to use both AI and ML, so artificial intelligence and machine learning software embedded in wearables like an Apple Watch that a patient can wear all day long and record how they're sleeping, how they're moving, as well as what we call invisibles. And these are devices that go in the home of a patient and then by radio frequency can follow that patient as they walk around their home and do their daily events, even as well as their breathing while they sleep, and tell us how are they doing today, and record this on what we call a continuous basis. Till now, the way we do that is when the patient comes into the doctor's office, we take a snapshot of about a half hour of their life over the last month, and we say, how are they doing? Well, that really doesn't describe it for most patients. The other way is patients journal. Every half hour, they'll say, do I have control of my muscles or not? Again, not really capturing the full essence of the quality of life that they're seeking or abandoning as their disease worsens. And so that's the most basic way. The other way is in science and in our hands, we manufacture a very complicated thing, a whole cell. And we put hundreds of thousands or millions of these in people's brains, and studying what we call the CQA, which stands for critical quality attributes. What makes this medicine work? Doing that and collecting all the data, both from the manufacturing suites, from the laboratories, from the clinical trial, and patients themselves, putting all that together and then looking for those things are very often too complicated for an individual scientist or clinical trial scientist to see. And so we use the help of machine learning and artificial intelligence to look for those correlations and help us unbury what might be the critical quality attributes.
That's fantastic. It's phenomenally complicated, and yet you've explained it very clearly, and I get a real sense of machines and scientists working together to produce these insights and steps forward. So thank you for that, and thank you for the hope that that we can now have, which is something that as you alluded to, hasn't existed before. That terrifying decline, that inevitable decline, is something that perhaps we can one day hope will not have to happen, and that is a extraordinary transformation. So Seth Ettenberg, thank you so much for being on Just One Question and answering several, and I appreciate very much the work that you and your team at BlueRock Therapeutics are doing. Thank you for being on Just One Question.
Thank you very much for the time, Nick, and always a pleasure to talk with you anytime.